Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Back with a little discussion today. First, let's take a quick time to poke around on the 280ZX. 280ZX needs a starter to get it running again, and then it should be back on the road. Brakes will be next on the list of necessary items. As far as in this video, you'll see some master cylinder removal as well as the new master cylinder being put in, and the unparalleled fun of hanging around upside down in the floorboard underneath the steering wheel as I'm messing around with the pedals to release the cotter pin to get the old master cylinder out of the car. For those who are not aware, your master cylinder is what actually provides pressure back to your clutch pedal in the manual transmission. There's actually one for your brakes as well, so that the pressure on your brake pedal from that hydraulic piston. So it literally sits inside the car, mounted to the firewall, and it has a fork that is inside. It reaches through the floorboard to the back of the clutch pedal, and then it has a peg and a cotter pin that holds it in place against the back of the clutch pedal. So when you push it down, it compresses that cylinder, which means that in order to change out the master cylinder, you got to hang around upside down in the floorboard with a pair of pliers reaching up to find the cotter pin so that you can get the peg out and pull the master cylinder out through the firewall. Lots of fun. Lots of fun. It's definitely one of the most wonderful positions to be in. It's great on the shoulders and the elbows. I mean, just a world of fun. Really makes you want to go restore cars. So, now that I'm done griping about the repair work on a classic sports car, let's take a quick second before we get into today's video purpose to touch on a couple of new things that have happened in the TTRPG YouTube world. Got a lot of things going on. You've got the wonderful Lara Croft game, the Tomb Raider game that has been made by Black Hat, and like everything made by Black Hat is just the most horrible social justice trash. That company has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Everything they've ever made has been subpar at best. And in this case, it's, hey, let's take Tomb Raider and un-Tomb Raider everything about it. It has nothing to do with running around and exploring ancient tombs and finding ancient artifacts and whatnot. And it has everything to do with hunting down the people who do it because, boo, evil colonizer. I'm literally shocked that they don't use an alignment system that is based on the race of the characters. So if you're white, you obviously have to be evil. And if you're a person of color, everything you do is right. Because that's the kind of tripe that is coming out of Black Hat. I expect that game to fail miserably, even though it's tied to Tomb Raider. I'm sure there's a fanatical Tomb Raider base out there somewhere that'll spend the money just to add it to their collection. But it's just claptrap. And that's running around right now. Other things is good old Condor DM appears to have come back out of the shadows to rant and rave and tell everybody how they're ignorant and stupid and don't know anything and how you're just garbage and trash if you don't do things the way he says to do them. And, of course, to cry about his girlfriend leaving him and cheating on him, and then to tell everybody how to move in social circles and interact with other human beings, which is, frankly, quite shocking because that has never been Condor's strong suit. However, he does have some relatively decent TTRPG content if he will start putting it out. There's a lot of little good pieces that can be pulled out of it if you can get past some of his extremely tyrannical black and white, just no give, no gray area style of giving advice. And that actually kind of plays into the topic today. Something that's not so great, but having little seeds of usefulness in it. In this case, we go back to generic Ginny D giving generic Game Master advice. I always find it hilarious when she pumps out all these great earth-shattering, blow-your-mind revelations on how to be a good Game Master or how to play tabletop role-playing games, in particular Dungeons & Dragons well. And of course, everything's a new great revelation to her because her gaming career is roughly the same age as her YouTube channel. She's just doesn't have a lot of experience. And what experience she does have is heavily, heavily colored and almost poisoned by the fact that she's been a celebrity player and a celebrity game master virtually since the first time she picked up a D20. But I always call her generic Jenny D because what good there is to pull out of her channel is really basic generic advice on how to use some things. And every so often, her story gaming, critical role fed style does bleed over into actual useful things. And it's really funny because you end up in a situation where I agree with generic Jenny slightly more than somebody who I actually respect, like the RPG Pundit. And that's where this video kind of comes in. Both the RPG Pundit and good old generic Jenny D in recent videos, I'll link them below, touched on a particular story gaming mechanic, which I don't actually like to call it a story gaming mechanic. I just call it a narrative mechanic, which is the infamous yes and no but. To call it a mechanic is kind of wrong. It's not a mechanic. It's not an actual game rule. It's more of a style of responding to a request or resolving a situation. And obviously Jenny D and the RPG Pundit are going to come from radically different backgrounds. On one hand, you have a man who doesn't even really play video games and has been an avid tabletop role-playing game player since the chainmail days, who is an accomplished game designer and a very well-respected author in the TTRPG space, and actually is one of the architects of 5th edition. And on the other hand, you have generic Jenny D, who is bouncy, bubbly, super enthusiastic, literal green-haired feminist generic Dungeons and Dragons player who I'm not even certain has ever picked up dice to play something other than Dungeons and Dragons, and in fact, only recently started using the term Game Master instead of Dungeon Master when the OGL scandal happened, and even she had to start looking at a break from Wizards of the Coast, not coincidentally, along with Critical Role, because she's a critter. Let's just be honest about it. So, wildly different perspectives, wildly different approaches to gaming and views and what's important, and both of them just kind of crisscross on the yes and no but. So, Pundit was coming at it from the perspective of going against story gaming. And I agree with him on story gaming. I do not agree with him on narrative telling. So he puts everything back to the White Wolf gaming stuff of the late 90s and the threads that came out, the forums that came out in the early 2000s that really tried to start driving, particularly Dungeons and Dragons, though it's kind of funny that they've moved to Dungeons and Dragons because they really started as kind of the hipsters where we're not going to play Dungeons and Dragons. Only a loser would play, a sellout normie would play Dungeons and Dragons. We play whatever game they made up that, you know, had 6 people who actually had it, never published books because they all had to be like handwritten or hand typed and printed out on their printers at home because nobody wanted to publish them. Everything was narrative. Everything was about story gaming. And he goes to that as the beginning. And to me, that's disingenuous and he should know better. Because story gaming has its birth in the Hickman Revolution in the 80s. Dungeons and Dragons, starting with 2nd edition and a little before, really starting with Ravenloft, moved away from just kind of open generic simulationism like a video game, an adventure gaming style, which is what it is. They say role playing. Oh, this is role playing versus story gaming. Not really. It's adventure gaming is what the original Dungeons and Dragons was. It moved into role playing and narrative gaming. And narrative gaming simply means that everybody has a mind towards the story. Where it turns into story gaming is where the story takes over the game. Okay? that's when you get into things like railroading and theft of player agency and trying to find ways to make character actions that don't suit the story somehow service the story. That's when you get into story gaming, and that is bad because that turns it from a game into just circle jerk story time with improv actors. So, how does this get into yes and no but? I think Pundit threw the baby out with the bathwater because he goes into yes and no but and more or less says, this is trash, this is garbage, this is completely useless, and it really should just be yes or no. You succeed or you fail. We don't need this yes and it does this to further you, to move you in a certain direction, or no and also but this happens, so it gives you a little bit of it also moves the story forward. And he's touching on the right thing. You should never have no, but this allows you to advance the story. So for instance, as a game master, you've painted yourself into a corner where the rest of the narrative is on the other side of a door. The only way they can get through it is to unlock it. You don't go, no, but you don't successfully unlock the door, but you do hear a loud clicking of some kind as if there's a mechanism in the wall, and now they can search to find a hidden switch to open the door. You should have left yourself some way for them to advance things without having to go through that door, and you should be open to them having other ways through it. It should not just be, no, you don't unlock the door and now you're stuck. Figure something out, which is kind of the way Pundit was putting it. But at the same time, you shouldn't have, say, that door that's there, and no, but I'm going to save your ass by having this hidden switch over here that you hear. I might have the hidden switch there so you can get through it that wasn't there in my notes, but you're going to have to come up with the idea to search for it on your own. Kind of like, no, but, and I'm not going to tell you what the but is. It's just, no, you failed to unlock the door. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, but if he searches for something else, I might give him another chance. I might give him another attempt at the lock. I might say there's a hidden switch. I might say, oh, well, you really closely examine the door and there's a way for you to get a crowbar or to shove your sword blade through the crack under it or something to get enough leverage to pop the lock open. It's just going to be very loud and it's going to alert people on the other side. That is a version of no but or yes and that is very useful in any type of tabletop role-playing game, and I would argue belongs there. Whereas the way Pundit was putting it forward, yes and no but are always bad because you're eliminating simulationism. Sometimes you just can't open the door and that's the end of your adventure. That's cool, but much like George R.R. Martin in storytelling, he randomly kills people off for no damn reason, and it really harms the storytelling in the Game of Thrones series. Because, as it's stated in the epic rap battle between him and J.R.R. Tolkien, yes, it's true to life for people to fall and die randomly, but newsflash, it's called fantasy, it's meant to be unrealistic. Just dying by chance is not always the best thing to be there. I'm not saying save your character, prevent them from dying, but at the same time, you don't just throw everything out in the service of realism or the service of simulationism. Now, Ginny D, she was bringing up she had a video about 3 game master tips to be a better game master. And she was talking about inflexibility and not being rigidly held to the rules. And she was saying yes and no but. And that's about where the good advice ended. Because generically, from a generic standpoint, having other options and allowing ways to resolve a situation or to move the story forward, even if it's a little off track, are good. What old Jenny D put forth is not a good example. It's a terrible example. She's like, oh, my character said, they just had a hard battle, and goes, well, my grandmother taught me to make a salve that can help heal us. And she's like, well, you say yes, and you have to go find this such and such flower to make the salve, and now you've got a little side quest, and they got to do something to earn it, and they don't just get free healing. Or, no, but being, well, yeah, you had that thing, but you can't do that because to do it, you're going to have 15 weeks to make this salve. But you could take all the flowers that are needed to make it and trade it for discounted healing potions in town. These are bad. These actually kind of play into Pundit's thing. Like, yes and no but should not just circumvent mechanics and balance. Hey, my grandmother taught me to make this salve. No, she didn't. You don't just get to make up shit that's convenient in the backstory. The answer to that should be, go ahead and roll a healing check. Okay, you didn't succeed? No, you don't have any kind of salve that you knew from the past. Go ahead and roll a heal check. Okay, you got a 15 or a 20 or whatever the DC that's set by the DM is. Okay, cool, you do know how to make a salve. Now we can talk about what's necessary to make that salve, how effective it is. But just saying yes and, just saying no but, is not the proper way to use yes and no but. That's when it gets into what Pundit was saying, where it's more or less bastardizing the game in service to the story, as opposed to making it a game where the player's decisions have consequences. And sometimes you don't have a magic salve that grandma taught you that you just suddenly remembered when you got done fighting the fire elemental and everybody's burned. What, you don't have healing as a skill? Well, guess what? No, you didn't get taught shit. Because if you were taught anything about healing, you'd have the heal skill. And you can roll the healing skill, and we can determine what you know and how effective it is. So we can use yes and no but we have to back it up with the mechanics. This is a little bit rambly, a little bit ranty. I was just kind of thinking about it, and this is definitely coming out free form, but there's a happy medium between Pundit, who has become too rigid with the OSR view of things, mainly I think because he's seen a creation he made in 5th edition be bastardized and driven into that camp, and he's having what I think is probably a knee-jerk reaction to it. Much like this video, his video was very ranty and not his normal, very well formulated and thought out points. It was him speaking off the cuff and just coming off the top of his head, and you could tell. And maybe he didn't quite say what he meant, but it sounded to me like a knee-jerk reaction where his advice was, no, we got to throw the baby out with the bathwater because this baby is going to grow up to be Mustache Man from 1930s Germany. Then on the other hand, you had Ginny D, who was giving very good generic advice about not being too inflexible and giving players some rewards for their creativity. But as usual, her advice falls apart in the execution, because the execution, A, is in service of story as opposed to the game itself, and is unbalancing, and is all about how can we capitulate and give the players, make things easier for the players, and just overly reward them. Say, oh yes, you're going to get what you want in some form or another because of the way I'm going to implement these rulings, and I'm going to completely ignore any mechanical answers that happen to be within the game system. So, rambly, a little bit, kind of free form myself here. But if you could follow along, I'd really appreciate it. If you'd hop in the comments and give me your thoughts, tell me what you think about yes and no but. Tell me what you think about the implementation and the importance of having mechanics involved in those decisions. And just give me your thoughts on where the line needs to stop. How close do you need to be to the story gaming versus how close do you need to be to the simulationism? And where is the balance? Where do you need to find that game to really have the most enjoyment and to build the best game overall, in your opinion? Like, share, subscribe. Tell me what you think. Looking forward to it. Talk to you guys next time.